All right, so we're back and ready to get started with the build here. I've got the tools I'm going to need for this first part, which is some hex wrenches and a second hex wrench for taking the head block apart. And we've got some calipers here, digital caliper for setting up our main arms, and we've got our ball link tool for setting that up as well. And we've got some thread lock, some blue thread locker here, and then this is the grease that I like to use, but there's a bunch out there. I mean, you can kind of use, you know, whatever. I also like to use these little micro applicators. I find that these are pretty good, pretty handy, helps kind of speed things up a little bit and putting things, these are really good too when you're putting the grease inside the thrust bearing. You can really get in there and work with these. So these are nice little tools to have at your fingertips. Just a pair of scissors to cut all the bags open with. And that's pretty much it. The other thing I just want to do real quick is I don't have a copy of the 550X manual on my computer. So let's just take a look at how easy that is. Type in 550X manual into it. Comes right up to the Align site. And there we go. And it'll bring us up to the Align page. And it starts with the largest helicopters and then goes down in size as you go. And so here is our T-Rex 500 550X super combo. We are going to download the manual, and there it is, downloading now. So we've got our progress bar. Manual is downloading to the computer. Now I've got the manual downloaded to my iPad here. This was really good. This is where I did the manual review, you know, prior to the build. And I've done a couple of builds before, but before I start a build, I always go through this manual, and there's a couple of reasons why that's a good idea. We'll get into it as we go. There's a couple things in here that I don't particularly love the order in which it's written. So it's nice to review the manual completely before you start. And just pick out the little details of the model as you go, like the 0-degree pitch markers on top of the main head block and the blade grips. There's a lot of little details in the manual along the way, and nomenclature and things like that that are good to familiarize yourself with before you do the build. Some little things, you got the checkpoint align mark, which is on your linkage rods, and you want that check mark in the up position as you put all of the linkage rods onto the head in Swashplate, you know, arms. You want the check mark facing up. And if you notice here, the check mark side of the rod is reverse thread, kind of like plumbing. So you know, obviously you're turning the opposite way to thread the items on, versus the other side, the down side, is normal thread turn. The bottom is different. So some things to just familiarize yourself that'll help you out as you go through and you do the build. But the manual has downloaded here. We're gonna go ahead and just go to preferred customer, downloads, and where is it? Documents. One seem to be here. So after it shows up on the screen, it looks like I forgot this step. You have to go here and check this download button, and then pick a folder. I've already got it. It must recognize this page, and it's going to, we're just going to rename this though, 550X, 550X, and save. And that is actually going to take the manual from the screen where we can view it to actually downloading it to the computer. So now it is here on our computer, and we'll open it up. And so if we lost our internet connection or whatever, or if we're ever somewhere where we don't have an internet connection, now it is here and we can find it and get to it anytime. And so we'll roll down and get to our first page. So just going through the manual, some things I would note, if you didn't watch the unboxing video, the anabolic retainer is really only used to put the bearings in. Like that is used to fix the metal tube before assembly. The metal tube being the metal fixture that has the bearings in it, which is here. And so they're talking about this bearing and they're talking about this metal tube right here. And so it was used to put that in. If for some reason you remove these bearings, then you'd want to use that to put it back in. We're not going to take the bearings out. They're good to go. They're nice and level. Everything's good. So this anabolic retainer, we're really not going to use at all. We've got the blue thread lock. I just happen to have this, so we're going to use this one. Grease, here we go. This is the grease I'm using. Oil, I have oil. I don't have it in front of me. We don't need it for this step. This, I don't like this word, T43 glue. This is the T43 thread locker, not glue. So, I mean, to me, this is just a little bit confusing. When they talk about this T43 glue, they're talking about this thread locker, not CA glue. And they're just giving you an idea of how much to put on there and where to put it. And of course, as I mentioned in the unboxing, whenever you have a screw that has a collar, a smooth section, you want to slide the screw into the fixture, get the smooth section in there, and then put the T43 on. Do not put the T43 on the thread lock and then push it through the smooth fixture. That's going to gum up your head or your tail section, so you don't want to do that. So then we'll roll down, and here we go. Here's our first step, and that's where we're at with the iPad 2. We'll just use this for little close-up views when we need them as we go along here. And so this is just talking about our thrust bearing, and that there is an outer section and an inner section, and the outer section has a smaller diameter. So they're marked out and in, and we just want to make sure the bearings in the head are like solid. These main bearings are sealed bearings, but then there's a spacer, and the thrust bearing is a 3-piece unit. And this thrust bearing, I'm willing to bet when we get this out of the package, it's going to have like a speck of grease in it. So we're going to want to take our grease, and I like to use these little micro applicators here, and fill it the rest of the way in with grease, and then find the in section and put it in behind the spindle bearing spacer, and then the thrust bearing goes in. Observe bearing faces inside. So the thrust bearing is kind of like a cup shape, right? And so you just want the cup facing this way. So you imagine when this thing is spinning, the bearings themselves are pushing into the cup, which makes sense. You wouldn't want the thrust bearing insert to be facing the other way around, because then as the head spun, the bearings would be wanting to come out of their race. So we just want to make sure when we put this back together, you've basically, the part where you can see the bearing goes towards the center, and it's the cup, and then you can just see the outside of the bearings as you put it in. So we'll make sure when we put it back together that we see it that way. So that's all it. We've got our manual on our computer to follow along with. We've got our manual that we used for the build preview here on the iPad. I like it a lot. The details are really good. You can see it really clear. So that's it. Let's get started. So step one, let's open up package 55 FLH7. And I got a little container over here. We'll throw the... Here we have our linkage rods, and here comes our head block and our main blade grips. So there they are, head block and main blade grips. Now, as I said in the unboxing, these items come together, and this is our these are our 0 degree pitch marks on top of the head block. They're nice, so when your remote left stick is at center, these guys should be lined right up if you've got everything set up right. And the theory is that if you set up these linkage arms correctly, here we go, what page are they on? Here we go, third page of the build. If these linkage rods are the correct length, and the linkage rods that come up from the servos are the correct length, when the servo horns are at 90 degrees, you should have 0 pitch. Right, and so that's why it's important you've got your caliper here and you want to measure these linkage rods as you make them. And like I said, the way the kit is designed and the way all the numbers work together, when you go, you know, center diameter, or you go from where the arm starts to the arm starts is 27 millimeters, you do all these measurements right to spec for the 2 sets of arms. One set goes from the swash plate up to the riser arm, up to the main blade grips, and one set, 3 arms, go down to the servos. If the servo arms are set correctly at 90 degrees, then your head block should be indicating 0 degrees of pitch. And we'll get there and verify all that at that portion of the build. So we've got the pieces out of the package. We're going to go ahead and take them apart. All right, so I'm back. We've got our head block and main blade grips completely disassembled. We've got, so let's just take a look here. This is the feathering shaft sleeve, and then we've got our damper rubber pieces, and then we've got our spindle bearing spacer, and then you have your main bearings inside your main blade grips. Okay, then you have another spindle bearing spacer. So we've got the feathering shaft sleeve, and then you have your damper rubber, and then you have, outside of that, you have your spindle bearing spacer, your first spindle bearing spacer. Now, they are different, okay? So there's a spindle bearing spacer outside the head block, outside the main blade grip, and there's a spindle bearing spacer inside. They are different. They're definitely very different. And it matters which is which. The one that goes on the inside is this copper looking one, and you want its flat back that way, and then the more rounded shape towards the main blade grip. Okay, so that's there. Then your bearings that are inside your main blade grip will be in this area right here. And then you're going to have your second spindle bearing spacer. So these pieces both have the same nomenclature, but they are a little bit different. This is the order that these things need to go. So if for some reason you lost track of it, you've got your feathering shaft sleeve, and then you have your damper rubber, and then you have your spindle bearing spacer, which is this first one. And just remember, it looks different. It's this one, okay? You want that one to be outside the main blade grip. So then you have the main blade grip, which has two bearings inside of it. And then on the other side of the bearings is another spindle bearing spacer. So it's the same name, but it is definitely a different unit. It looks completely different, okay? So then you're going to have your thrust bearing inner, right? So there's your in. And then you're going, you've got the race this way, so your channel for the ball bearings is going to be facing outward. And then you've got your thrust bearing right here, which, as I said, comes from the factory, partially packed with grease, but we're going to pack it in the rest of the way. And then you've got your thrust bearing outer piece, which is here. And then you've got a spacer, and you've got your main blade. You got your socket screw that goes on the end, right? And so this is the order that these pieces go in. Now another two, you've got these two socket screws that hold the arm for the main blade grip, right? So just don't forget, you don't really need to take these off. These just kind of sit in here. You can leave them in. They don't necessarily need to be removed. I was in there, so I pulled them off. I would say just leave. Oh, there we go. Okay, so now it's on. You've got these two socket screws here that you're going to need to Loctite and put back into there. And so we'll get started. We've got this. We'll grab some grease here. And what I'll do is I'll put it on this half. And just kind of spread it out. And then what I'm going to do is take our feathering shaft sleeve, and I've got the grease on it, put it here. We're going to go a little bit further with this grease. I stopped right there, and boy, it made a difference. It stopped right there. So we're going to spread some grease on there, like so. And then we're just going to slide this out till it's about even, which is there. And now we're going to use that to keep our fingers from getting greasy. And we're going to put some grease on the other side. Like so. So I just want to spread this out real good. I don't want it too thick in any one spot. And there we go. That looks good. So after we get that done, we are going to take our spindle spacer and push that on. And at this point, you're going to have to put this inside the head block. So push it inside the head block. We're going to put our spindle bearing spacer, our damper rubber on the other side. And then we're going to push it through till it's approximately even. There we go. That looks perfect. All right, so we've got those things back installed. So now we're going to put our spindle bearing spacer, the first spindle bearing spacer, back on. I'm going to put that on there, and I'm going to put it back on for the other side as well. Put it back on there. So that is all ready to go. We've got our feathering shaft sleeve in the middle, and then we've got our rubber damper there, and then we've got our first spindle shaft spacer on the outside, which is this copper colored one. We've got the more rounded part facing that way. And so this is all good and ready to go. We're going to hold that up there, and we are going to get our blade grip situated. Now what I like to do is just take a little cup like this and put the Loctite in there. Let's get, this is a 2.5, I believe. Put this on here. Yep. And we'll get some Loctite on there. And then we'll just put some Loctite on the end of the screw like so. And take our main blade grip and go back in. I like to do this by hand. That way, if anything was cross-threaded or I don't know, something fell in there or whatever, I would feel it and, you know, stop and take it out and figure out what's going on and what's wrong. So again, we've got our screw, and we'll just put some Loctite around the end of it, like so, and put it in here. Oops. All right, snug them down. Obviously, you don't want to strip them, but you want to make sure they're in for the long run. And there we go. Those are all situated. Now let's take our ball link, put it on here. And this is like absolutely critical. I mean, if you do not Loctite these, they will come loose. So get some Loctite on there. Put it on here. Okay, so it's nice and tight. And you can see there's a little bit of Loctite there, so we know there's plenty on there. So there we go. The main blade grip is all done. It's all ready to go. And we are going to install that now. Push that on, and there we go. It is on there and ready to go. Now what we're going to do is put our next spindle bearing spacer back in, like so. And then the inside, I'm just going to hit it with a little grease. Make sure our race is good to go, and it is. So put it down in here, and there's the inside going in. And it's in there, good. So this is where we'll take our thrust bearing itself, and you can see it's got grease a little bit, but not completely. So we're gonna take our little applicator here and fill in where there is not grease. Like so. Okay, good. We've got all of our sections filled up with grease. So now we're going to take our thrust bearing. We want the cup face with just the outside of the bearing showing to be facing outward. So like so. Drop that right in there. There we go. And now we've got our thrust bearing outer section right here. And again, we're just going to run a little grease around that. There we go. And we're going to put that back on here. out. And there we go. And then the last thing is our socket screw and spacer. So we got our spacer here. Take our socket screw and we're going to put some Loctite on it, like so. And then grab our 4mm wrench here. Unfortunately, I don't have a full-size 4mm wrench. We're going to use this little Allen key here and drive this back in. And then we're just going to push it all the way through. Perfect. If you're using those pliers, just be very careful not to damage this. And this is where it's very nice to have that spindle tool, which I unfortunately don't have here. And now this is all lined up and ready for the other half. Okay, so I just set this down here. This half is completed. We've just put that back in, but I'm going to wait on this until we've got both halves on there and we can torque it down. For the other half, I'm going to do the exact same thing I did for that half, and then we'll come back. All right, so I've got my the top end of my head block done, and just what I did was the exact same thing for the left side that I did for the right. These are moving just, oh man, like smooth as glass. I mean, you can see how easily they're just the slightest bit off-centered and this thing falls down. Moving extremely smooth, so perfect. That's just the way we want it. Next, we are going to move down to our control arm and radius arm, and this is what I was talking about when I in the build video when I mentioned collared screws or screws that go through fixtures, right? So this screw actually isn't a collared screw, but you don't want to get Loctite in these bearings. You know, if you get Loctite on the bearings for the radius arm. No, I'm sorry. This is the control arm. This is the radius arm. And the other thing is pay attention to the orientation of this radius arm on here. Let me take that screw off. Pay attention to the orientation of the radius arm on here because you want it to be on that way. You want to be extremely careful when you're doing this, not to be getting Loctite all over it. And this is one spot where I'm going to put the Loctite. I'm going to put the Loctite in the hole. And this is definitely one of the spots in the build that is just a little bit more tedious, and you've really got to be careful about what you're doing and where you put this Loctite because you don't want to gum these items up. All right, so I'm going to pop this radius arm. Oh, there's not a, it's not really a bearing. It's a radius arm spacer, I guess I would call it, out. And that will allow me full access to that point there. Okay, and now what I'm going to do is take this micro applicator and put my Loctite right down in there. Like so. All right, and so that is going to, I don't know if that's fine enough. I am going to take one of these. I'll have to get myself a new one. We're going to take this head off of here so we can make sure that we get this Loctite right down in this hole. There we go. Okay, so Now I've definitely got this Loctite down, or thread locker down into that fixture. Now I'm going to put this radius arm spacer back on, and now I'm going to take this screw and put it on with the thread locker in there and tighten it up. Oh yeah, and sure enough, like that is nice and smooth. There is no resistance there. I'm going to pop this spacer off the other side, set it down over here, and take this thread locker and put it in there. And this is one of those little parts of the build that is pretty intricate. This is, I call this the surgeon work. You really want to take your time with this and make sure that you're getting this the way you want it, right? So I see the thread lock in that fixture now. And what I don't see is thread lock outside of it. That whole area looks smooth. It all looks good. So we're going to put this radius arm spacer back on now. And then we're going to take our screw and put it in and drive it into the socket with the thread lock in there. Like so. Just give it a little bit of torque. And now, I mean, that is so smooth. It's perfect. I mean, that's nice. I'm super happy with that. That works very well. Now, you know, everybody makes mistakes, and I could have missed something. I will go back and look how easy that's moving. I will go back and double check that like 10 minutes from now, I didn't miss that there was some Loctite on there and this thing got gunked up. But it looks pretty perfect. That thing is moving just as free as can be, yet these screws on both ends are tight, definitely not loose, and they have thread locker down in there. Okay, so then you just want to kind of pay attention to the orientation of the radius arm as you put it back onto the head block as well. It needs to be facing, you know, I would say this end up as it goes on to there. And there is a spacer on top. But again, you're going to take this screw and you're going to put it through bearings. But the difference with this screw is that it's at the end of the arm. So I can put the thread locker on the screw. I just need to be really careful about it and make sure when I do it, I don't get any up where those bearings are, just on the end of the screw. All right, and this is the surgeon work. I'm going for about the first 3.5, 4 threads. There we go. That's good. All right, and then take this. So these radius arms, they cross sides like this when they go on. So the Align logo is in the correct position. Now let me just double check the tension here. Control arm, excuse me. Control arm, which leads to the radius arm. It's almost like a little bit like something on there. There we go, clean it off. Okay, so now that screw is torqued down nice and tight. There's Loctite on it, and just look how free that arm moves. Okay, and how free that arm moves. But those 3 screws have Loctite on them. This screw is not as bad because, like I said, it doesn't go into a fixture like this. This radius arm is the trickiest one because you can't get to the other side of the screw and put it on one at a time because it's on this fixture here. So just make sure you pop the radius arm spacer off, put the Loctite into the receptacle very carefully with an applicator is what I would recommend. And make sure you get enough in there. You know, this is a smaller applicator. You need to get down into there. So do it 4 or 5 times. Make sure you get enough Loctite down in there, thread locker. And then put the radius arm spacer back on, and then put the screw for the radius arm through the radius arm spacer, and then drive it into the fixture where you'll have the Loctite on it, but the radius arm spacer and the radius arm won't have Loctite on them where they meet the screw. And that keeps it nice and free spinning like that. So that's that one. I'm going to flip it over and do the other side. It's the exact same thing. So I'll do it and we'll come back. All right, so we're done with our head block section. Our main blade grips are done. As you can see, they're spinning freely. We've Loctited these. We'll just run through this real quick. We Loctited our ball links. We Loctited these 2 screws. We disassembled, we took the spindle shaft completely out. Spindle shaft cover is in the middle, and then we've got our rubber blocks, and then we've got our spindle shaft spacer, which is like a copper towards one here, and then you've got a spacer inside the main blade grip, then another spacer, then you've got another spindle shaft spacer on this side, which is a different one. It's a silver colored one, and then you got your thrust bearing inside with the race facing this way, and then you've got your bearings in there with the cup facing the outside, and then you've got your thrust bearing outer section with the cup facing, with the race facing inward, so the balls can move, ball bearings can move inside of it. And then you've got your socket screw with your spacer on it on the end with Loctite put in. And then I just put a wrench on each side and just torqued them a little bit. Now you can see this has got to be a good 15-20 minutes later, and this is just all moving as smooth as can be. There's no binding at all. So then we move down here to our control arms and our radius arms, and you can see you take this screw out here. There is a spacer on top of that screw. That is important. You want to make sure you don't misplace it and it goes back in, or what will happen is it'll bind up and it won't move smoothly. I highly recommend as you take this stuff apart, you lay it out on here. Do one side at a time, if you know, when you can, and pay very close attention to the orientation. The radius arm goes this way across. I'm sorry, the control arm goes this way across, and the radius arm swings this way down. These screws, I would say, are one of those super surgeon parts of the build. You got to take out the screw, and then what I recommend is take off the radius arm spacer and then put some Loctite down in the fixture, and then put the screw back on with the Loctite down in there. Just make sure you put enough in there, and then flip it over and do the same thing on the other side. Take the screw out, it's loose out of the package, pop the radius arm spacer out, and then use some sort of fine item and put the Loctite down into the fixture of the control arm. Okay, and then put your radius arm spacer back on, and then put your screw down through it. And doing that, you can just see how freely all this stuff moves. It's not gummed up at all. It's been 15-20 minutes, so if I had gotten any Loctite, all these screws are tight, as tight as you want them, and all these items are moving very freely, which is exactly what we're looking for. The biggest thing that I see is people getting Loctite on these spacers or on these bearings, and then 15 or 20 minutes later, this is all gummed up and it just doesn't move smooth. And then you have to take it apart and you have to clean it, isopropyl alcohol preferably, clean all the parts off, let everything dry, although isopropyl alcohol dries pretty quick, you know, and then start all over again. It's just easier to do it the first time. And while I would say that this work is a little bit intricate, there's nothing difficult about it. I mean, anybody can do this. I would say anyone, really, if you read through this manual carefully, and maybe watch this video or a couple other videos that are out there, anybody can do this. This is not difficult work, but it is a little bit tedious, and there are some spots like these radius arms where you got to pay attention to what you're doing. So that brings us down to our swash plate, which we are going to remove from this package here. I love as the build moves along, these little packages start going away. Pretty soon you're whittling them down. You got less and less packages. We're going to set that aside there, get our swash plate out, and there goes package number 55FLH6. That one is going in the bin. And so now what I'm going to do is I am going to remove each one of these ball links and put thread. Here, I'll just do one. But I'm just going to pull it off. Ooh. These are 2mm, not 1.5s. So they were 1.5s in the main blade grips, but these are 2mm. All right, so what I'm going to do is remove these like so, and then take my Loctite here and put it on here like so. Now, I like to go a little heavier on this Loctite, okay? There's no collar, there's no anything like that, and it's in the swash plate. It's getting a lot of movement. It's there's no reason not, it's not going to hurt anything. So I like to put a little bit extra on there. This is blue Loctite. You can undo it later. So that's exactly what I'm going to do for the other six of these, is take them off and Loctite them, put them back on like so. GoPro, stop recording. So the one thing I want to point out on this is that these ball links were on the inner holes out of the package, but if we go to the directions, it says use the outer holes. So just note that when you take them out, they're going to be in this position, and when you put them back, they go back in that position. So that's, I don't know, just a little odd, but other than that is totally routine. I Loctited all these except this one. I'm going to have to take this one in and out, or, with the anti-rotation bracket, and so I'm just not going to Loctite this one for now. It's the only thing that I'm not doing, so I'll write it down, and I'm just going to leave this loose for now, but I'll come back to it. All right, so the head block is completely done. The swash plate is completely done. Now we are looking at 55FLH7A, and what we are, the highlight here is we've got these two, what are these called? Linkage rods. Again, those are the alignment checkpoints there. We want to make sure those are facing up, and on the checkpoint side it's like plumbing threading, it's opposite. And the other thing is the head block screws are in this bag, right? And so throughout the kit build, the screws are in the in the fixtures, not the head block screws. They're separate. So when I didn't see them in this fixture at first, I got kind of like, I wonder where those are. They're in that little bag along with this stuff. And so this is where we get our ball link tool right here. Put this on here. So this should fit these perfectly. And grab our pliers and grab this. And this is the checkpoint side, so this should be backwards. And sure enough, I'm spinning it backwards, so it's lefty-tighty, righty-loosey, opposite of normal. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get them started, right? I'm going to get all 4 of these just started on here. And then we'll go back and look at it. It's got to be 27 millimeters from there to there. So we'll get out our caliper and we'll measure it out. But first we'll get them started. All right, so now I got my linkage rod ball link connectors on there. Let's take a look here. And should be 27 millimeters inside to inside. So we've got quite a ways to go. So what I want to do is I like to take it, you know, try to make it fairly even. And so now I'm tightening the what's that, checkpoint side. So this is going to be going righty-tighty, as the saying goes. So I'll take this, push it on here, and we got quite a ways to go. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 halves. Okay, and then I'm just going to spin it around to the other side. So it was 4 whole turns. And go here, and now this is the checkpoint side, so we're going to go the opposite way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now, I didn't count when I started. That looks about even. And check this out, and yeah, we got to go a little more. Perfect, that's okay. And inside to inside, we're super close to 27 millimeters. So let's take a look here. This side's got a little more. We're going to go one more turn. That is the normal way, normal side. So we'll go back here, and I'm just going to give it half a rotation, see what happens. It's got to come in just a little bit more, probably half a turn. So now what I want to do is look and see how these are going to be oriented. And so it's coming off of the main blade grip, and it's going down to, it doesn't really show it at this point. No, it doesn't. Well, this has got the A's opposite, right? And so the A is going to face outward on the top and inward on the bottom. Okay, so the A is, this is the checkpoint here, so we want this up. So if the A is out, the bottom one is in. Okay, so it's already oriented almost perfect, although it should be 180 degrees, and it's not. And we also need a half a turn. So, but we can't do a half a turn because it's already in the right position. So, see what happens. We're going to do a half a turn on that side. And then spin it around and do half a turn on this side. And just kind of line them back up. The A's are going to go opposite each other. And so let's take a look now 27 millimeters. Yep, we're still on 27. That is extremely close. That's really super close. All right, and so we want our checkpoint up, and we want our A facing outward as we snap it onto the ball. And so that's going to be like this. And I'm just going to take my thumb, put a little pressure on it, and there we go. Pop it on. I've noticed that when these are new, they're just a little bit snug. You can see how that's moving there. But if you have the A facing outward, you're good to go. And the directions tell us, as you can see here, they don't really tell us, but it's in the diagram, on the main control, on the main blade grip control arm, the A is facing out, right? And so that's how it is there. And then in the drawing, if you go down, the A is facing in that arm. But it doesn't have us connecting them at this point. So that is how you set up the linkage rods. You want to use a caliper, set it. You want to make sure that your check mark, which is this line here, is facing up, is towards the top. While you're screwing them on and off, the check mark side is opposite to screw on. It's opposite the normal direction. The non-check mark side, which is the bottom, is the regular screw motion. As you can see in this arm, I kept the threads even. So like, you know, you don't have one with like 2 threads showing or no thread showing and one over here that's barely screwed on. So just try to keep it even, try to keep it neat. And, you know, and per the manual, I've got the A facing outward, upward, and then I've got the A facing the opposite direction on the bottom, and it will be interfacing with the ball link on the swash plate, probably just like this. Boom. And so that's why that A is facing that way. So that's the one arm. I'll set up the other one on the other side now. All right, so we've arrived at the main shaft. We know what is the top and what is the bottom because the top has 2 holes and the bottom only has 1. For the spacers, for when you finally put this in, they're going to be below this collar in the middle. So what we want to do is start by putting the main shaft through the swash plate like so, and then we want to take our control arms and make sure they're in the right position, which they are, and then we want to insert this and line up like so. And then take the screws that were in that bag and push them through. And there we go. And then I'm just going to check these before I go snapping all these on. So these should go on these, which they line up here pretty well. Oh, wow, that's a little bit difficult. There we go. And then sure enough, the A's are facing the right way, and this should snap on here. go. And then this one will go on here. It looks like there is plenty of room to get the other screw through, so I'm going to go ahead and snap this on. You want to get a little leverage. There we go. And then the last one goes here. And obviously once the anti-rotation bracket goes in here, then this one. And that's it. The head is all built. The only other thing I got to do here is poke this other screw through here. I'm going to hold on to these spacers in this bag for now. We won't know until we put our main gear in, until we put this head assembly and main shaft in with the main gear, if we're going to need both or one or neither of these spacers. So we'll just leave them to the side over there for now. This is all set up. Oh yeah, last thing I got to do is put this second head block bolt in, like so. And again, these are locking bolts, so these do not require Loctite. There's that. Now the bolts, they kind of inset into the head to get, there we go. And there it is, all set up. We can, if we push this to a certain position and we get it somewhere near flat, we should see that these line up. There we go. Now this swash is somewhat level, and you can see these line up almost perfectly. The control arms aren't on, so it's not perfect, but you can see that if the control arms were on, this is almost, these marks are lining up pretty well. So that looks good. That looks very good so far. We may have to make a small adjustment, but there it is. There's the head all set up from top to bottom. We've got Loctite on all of our ball joints. We've got our linkage rod connectors screwed on evenly. We've got our check mark upwards. We've got our A's facing outward. Our align logos are in the correct position. We didn't get any Loctite on our radius arms, so those are moving very freely. Everything is good to go, and that is the head setup, which I generally think of as part one of the build. This is usually a good point to take a break and maybe get a bite to eat or warm up your cup of coffee. Helps to have the Align coffee cup too. It helps with the build if you're drinking out of this coffee cup. Oh, I'm not sponsored by Align, by the way. I don't work for Align, and I'm not sponsored by Align, so they're not responsible for the things I am telling you. Just a hobbyist, and I've built a variety of kits, and I've been really happy with the Align product. And couple of these now I've had a good experience, so but I do not represent Align. But that's the head build. It's all done. I'm going to take a little break. We are going to switch up and use some different tools and change up the workspace a little bit for this next portion of the build. We're going to switch up some tools and switch up some stuff and take a little break, and we'll be back in a few minutes. All right, so I'm back and moving on to the next page after the head assembly. And what I've done is I've taken the contents of this bag 55 HB10, which are all of these metal pieces here, and I've sort of mocked them up into the frame, okay? These screws are not tight. They're just, you know, what I would call finger tight. They're still like kind of loose. You can feel a little wiggle in there. And then I'm removing all of the screws from the other side of these frame connectors and just putting them in a little magnetic tray over here. And these little magnetic trays are kind of nice to have, you know, when you're doing a build like this. The other thing I've got here is a piece of glass, and that is just so that I can make sure that the build is level. You're just going to need to remove these screws from the bottom of this front piece, and we'll put them over here. Now, most of these pieces came out of 55 HB10, but 55 HB11 will have these cross member pieces, okay? So now, just to recap real quickly, we've taken the left frame side. Well, I chose the left frame side. You could probably use the left or the right. And we've mocked in the contents of 55 HB10 into place in the frame here, but these screws are not tight, and I have not Loctited them yet. I've also taken these two frame connector pieces from 55 HB11, and what I'll do is mock in the other side of the frame, okay? And then the last piece, which is this one here, we'll put into the frame assembly. And then I'll have everything mocked up, okay? Then I'll use this piece of glass to make sure that the frame and everything is level. And then we'll take the drive shaft and put it through the bearings. And when the frame is level and all the sides are even and the drive shaft is lined up perfectly, then I'll pull the screws out one by one, Loctite them, and put them back in all the way. This is one area where I kind of feel like the manual is not really written the best. It's why you should read all the way through it before you go back, because if you take a look, it's sort of misleading. This page 9 has got you doing all of this assembly, and it's suggesting Loctite, thread locker. But if you notice, like that, every page on the manual has this. This is just sort of a, you know, wherever you have these screws, these pages have this like in a template. But then if we go to the next page, so this page is telling you put all these screws in and Loctite them. Okay, so if you were to do that, then you go to the next page, the first thing that you read is, first, do not fully tighten the screws of the main frame. I mean, I don't, that seems like something they should mention before they tell you to put the main frame together, but they don't. I mean, that's just the way it's written. Put the two bearings through the main shaft. I think what they're saying here is put the main shaft through the two bearings. Check if the movements are smooth, right? And so that's what I was just saying. They're basically telling you here, the bottom bracket must be firmly touching a level tabletop glass surface. Please keep the smooth movements on the main shaft and level bottom bracket, then slowly tighten the screws. This assembly can help for the power and flight performance. So, I mean, maybe what they're saying is put the Loctite on the screws and put them in loosely and then finish them. I'm doing it just slightly. I'm putting the screws in loosely. I'm mocking the frame up, and then I'm just going to pull them out and run them back in with Loctite on them. pretty much the same thing, pretty much what it's suggesting. The other thing is, as you can see, I've got a piece of glass here, and you know, just a little nitnoid thing here, but like here is the skid mount assembly for the front here in the diagram. Well, where's the back one? You know, it doesn't show it there, but down in the next page, it does show it there. And again, without that back piece installed, which is this one, it's not going to sit level because those pieces, they sort of protrude from the bottom. So in order to put it on the glass and get it to sit level, you need this piece that it doesn't show in the diagram until the next page to be installed back here. So, I mean, it's not a big deal, and if you look through these parts and pieces and you kind of take a look at what's going on, it does, I mean, it all makes sense, but the manual, I'd say it leaves a little something to be desired. But nevertheless, so now that we've taken a look at the manual, let's just look back on these pieces real quickly, and we'll talk about what we're doing. This is that bottom bracket. I am taking these screws out that you're going to use to hold in the landing skids. So we're going to take them out. Now, again, they don't really tell you, but the bottom bracket and the front bracket are identical, but the back bracket has longer screws and spacers because, you know, if you look a little further, that's where the tail boom supports connect, right? And so like on any models, you know, through the years, those back screws are always longer, but it doesn't even show the back piece in the manual when it talks about this frame assembly. So it's just a little, like I would say, it leaves a little something to be desired, but it's not a big deal, and you can certainly work around it. And so I will put those in now. I don't know if these screws are going to go all the way in without, yeah, see, they won't. Okay, but if you can see, this piece kind of protrudes on the bottom here, as does this one. So if these pieces aren't in place, the frame is going to sit crooked. I don't know how level you're going to get it if it's sitting crooked. Whereas if you put this back piece in, now the frame sits even. So I you know, this is the way I'm doing it. So now we put them together. The other thing I did was I did put the canopy mounts on the frame. So the two screws in the top blocks, the 4 screws that go in the top head block, are just a little bit longer than the rest. All right, so now I've got the whole frame mocked up. But as you can see, all these screws are not tight. They're a little loose. I don't believe it has us... Oh, it does. Yeah, putting the front end. So this bag here, 55HB11, it has these canopy supports, okay? Those screws that screw the canopy supports on are what screws into this front plastic piece, right? And so what you do is you take the screws and you put the collar out towards, no, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's how it is. Put the collar like this, and then you put the screw through here, and then it goes like that, okay? So you want the collar towards the screw. Yeah, that's perfect, and now it's in there. And then you run the screw in, like so. The screws for, of course, yeah, and it makes perfect sense. The screws for this front plastic piece are in this bag, 55 HB11, right? And so the other one's on the other side, and here's this last one here. So put it in like so. Now, all these screws all the way around in this entire frame assembly at this moment are just finger tight, right? And I've got the assembly sitting on glass to make sure that everything is level. The other thing I'm checking is just that everything is square, which it looks good. Once you get all this installed, it's kind of forced to be square. And I could say I did sense just a little bit of movement as I was putting all these things together, but now that they're all on there, it feels very secure. So it kind of makes sense to leave all the screws just a little loose till you get everything installed. You set it on a piece of glass to make sure it's nice and level. And then the last, well, not the last step, but almost last step is to take the drive shaft and set it into, there we go, like that. Perfect, okay? And you can see how smooth that is, okay? So now what I'm going to do is the frame is square, the drive shaft is in place, every piece of this unit is you know, all together. Nothing got tightened like at a different angle. Now I'm going to pull all the screws out and Loctite them. So I'll just grab this 2.5 here. I'm going to start with the drive shafts assembly screws, just because that is the unit that, if nothing else, we are most concerned with. So grab a screw, put some Loctite on it with our applicator. And drive it back in. And this is for final assembly, so I'm just going to give it a little, yeah, there we go, it's nice and tight. The other side, and again, I'm going to do these 4 drive shaft, these 8 drive shaft screws are the primary set screws to set these bearings, you know, for this drive shaft. And if I want this drive shaft to stay that smooth, I need to really make sure that these 4 are set perfectly. All right, so I went back and I tightened up all the frame bolts, so they're all tight now. Next, the directions after the framework is done in the front, what do they call this? What is a nomenclature on this? Receiver mount. Front receiver mount unit is installed. We moved down to installing the landing skid, which comes in bag 700 HG4 in the bin. It's not in the instructions, but I would recommend taking some glue and gluing these end caps in. They tend to fall off if they're not glued, so glue those in. Also, I'm not going to be using these rubber pieces here because I had a friend telling me about how if you're coming down and doing an auto, you could be landing on a smooth surface, you know, and these rubber grips can grab like a crack in the pavement or something, or, you know, they can just grab onto something where the skids will slide and tip the helicopter over. So Chris Rybert gave me that little tip about, you know, not using these, especially if you're going to do autos. I might just put them on here for the build, and then, you know, but in just such a way that I can pull them off if I'm going to be doing autos. But just two things to note on the skids. Other than that, it's pretty basic. Glue these tips on, and if you're going to be doing autos and sliding on the ground, remove these rubber pieces. But like I said, I'll probably put them on for the build, but just something to keep in mind. Well, build session 1 is done for me. This is a good spot to take a break. The head is built, the frame is built, the skids are on, obviously the flybarless control unit mount on the front is on. So the next step is to install the servos, which I kind of feel like is a turning of the page to the next step of the process. So this is a good spot to take a break. So this is going to be the end of build session 1 for me. One of the things that I like to do when I build is at the end of the session, I'll go back and I'll review my work. You know, and so a constructive way to, you know, look at the learning process is, you know, kind of like an essay. Tell me what you're going to tell me. Tell me what you're going to tell me. Tell me, and tell me what you told me. So my approach to building is do the build and then review your work at the end of the build session. And then when I'm done with the helicopter and it's 100% built, I'll literally go back to the manual and start at step 1, and I'll go through everything. I'll check every bolt that 3rd time. And that's how I built, that's not how I built my 650. That's how I missed that little brass screw in the back. If I had done that, that wouldn't have happened. So that's the way I've been building since. And the 2 helicopters I've built since then have flown fine. I have not had any issues at all. So that's the process that I've come to do. I try to do like a 3 or 4 hour build session, and I could probably go a lot faster if I had to, but you know, I try to enjoy the build and I try to take my time. And like I said, that's the process that I use. I go through the directions, I read through them the day before. And when I do the build, I read through them, I work on it, I do some stuff, I look back at the directions, and then when I'm done for the day, I'll go back. So that's just what I'll do real quick now. And in the process, what I'll also do is I'll show you the tools that I used. So stepping back to step 1 was when we did the head there, and so I needed 2 4mm wrenches to get these put these 2 bolts tension on them. When I was taking it apart, the one bolt was significantly harder than the other, and so what I have to do is very cautiously use a pair of pliers and put some cloth in there and hold that spindle shaft very firmly and get this end piece off. If I had the spindle tool, then I wouldn't have to have used the pliers, but I don't have the spindle tool, so I used the pliers and I used the cloth. It worked fine. I didn't mar it or anything, so I think it's fine. But we took it apart. We used grease on the thrust bearings. Of course, we used Loctite, blue Loctite on the ends. Moving down, this is the control arm here. Nothing big, nothing cosmic going on there. Just a reminder with these, don't put Loctite on it and push the screw through the bearings, or you'll gum up the head afterwards. The other thing is on these radius arms, what you want to do is take this screw out and then very carefully take this radius arm spacer out of the radius arm, which is plastic. So I just used this 1.5 millimeter wrench, and I took that spacer out of the radius arm, and that exposes the metal fixture underneath from the control arm that screw screws into, and just apply the Loctite to the fixture, because the radius arm, because of its shape, does not allow you to put the screw through and then put it on the end of the screw. So the radius arm is kind of like an exception to the way you're going to put Loctite on. You want to take this little tiny screw out, remove the radius arm spacer, and put that Loctite in the control arm's receptacle, and then carefully put the radius arm spacer back in, and then put the screw, through, and everything will remain nice and smooth. So then moving down to these, there's nothing really going on here. This is a 2 millimeter wrench though, instead of a 1.5. You want to pull all these off. This was the first deviation in the build. I did not Loctite this anti-rotation bracket ball, because I just find that I always wind up taking this off and putting it back on towards the end of the build, and so I don't Loctite that. So that was the first exception to the build. Other than that, I have pretty much followed the manual up to this point. So that gets the main shaft together. These two screws, again, they were separate from the head block, so just keep that in mind when you open it up. Most of the screws are in the fixtures, but those two were not. But it's no big deal. They're there. And just a reminder on these linkage rods, the A's face out, and checkpoint. The checkpoint is supposed to be going upward. So if this arm is installed correctly, the checkpoint is upward and the A is facing outward, and then it clicks onto the ball. And just take your finger and push it on there. You can pop them off with the ball link pliers. I didn't have to. I got this swash to where I thought it was level, and sure enough, these alignment marks line up almost perfectly. But we'll talk about that more when we get to the servo arms. So that completed the head build, and we moved into the frame. Now the frame we kind of mocked up, and the basic idea is that you want to put all the bolts in the frame all the way around, so that all of these fixtures, are on the same sheet of music. You don't want to put this fixture in by itself, put Loctite on this bolt and torque it down, and just have it at a fraction of a different angle than this one. You want everything to be on the same sheet of music. So what the book recommends that you do is that you put them in loosely, all the bolts, and then you take the frame and put it on a piece of glass, right? And that's what this mirror is all about. That's when we brought the mirror in, and set the helicopter on the piece of glass, and then remove the bolts. Now, my technique is I start with the drive shaft bolts. There's 4 of them. So I remove all 4, put Loctite on them, set them back in just till they get snug, and then tighten it down a little bit, tighten that one down a little bit, tighten that one down a little bit, tighten that one. I try to use like a cross pattern, right? Because this is the drive shaft. And then what I do is I move away from the drive shaft outwards as I tighten the rest of the bolts, right? So if you're dispersing any sort of tension, it's away from the drive shaft, not towards it, or any sort of an awkward motion. Because any sort of vibration or all the power in this helicopter is mostly running up this drive shaft right here. So that's where I started adding all the torque to the bolts, because that's where the stress is going to originate from when this thing is flying. Well, they're in the motor mounts. And so tighten up all the bolts there, and get them all Loctited, and then move down to the skids. Nothing big going on with the skids here. Just make sure that you glue these end caps in. I put these stoppers on here, but just something to keep in mind. You may want to remove these stoppers, like if you're doing autos and landing on a smooth surface. This soft rubber can catch and tip the helicopter. So you may or may not want them. For now, I put them on. We'll see. Maybe down the road, I'll take them off. So that's as far as I got with the build today. I used a 3mm wrench, a 2.5, a 2, and a 1.5. So I needed all 4 of these. I also needed a 4mm and didn't have it, so I just used these Allen wrenches for that. These magnetic trays come in very handy whenever you're taking the screws out of the assemblies. These are nice to have. You just throw them in there. This I used for the spindle shaft, but this is not really the tool that you want. A spindle shaft tool would be better. You really want to have a caliper for measuring these arms. I wouldn't, there's no other way. This is a tool that you definitely need to have. And so that's about it. The other deviation, so one deviation was that I left this anti-rotation bracket attachment fitting here loose. I've followed the book instructions, and we just went through and reviewed all the steps that I did here and all the pieces that were done today. Now, like I said, the next step is getting into electronics. To me, it's kind of turning and it's a different sheet of music. And I'm gonna do that on the next build session. So that is the T-Rex 550X build so far. There's been no surprises. I haven't had any issues. Everything has gone together well for me. I like the way Align puts all the almost every single bolt on these fixtures. Like, you don't get a bag of bolts. You know what I mean? Like, everything is attached here, which I think is cool. I think it's good for the build. And it definitely makes things easier to keep track of, and there's just less parts and pieces as you're doing the build. The head is really nice quality unit. You can see the way it's spinning in the drive system. It's really, to me, it has as little resistance as possible. These arms and everything were just flopping over when they weren't attached with these linkage rods. With the linkage rods on there, there's a little bit of resistance now because I feel like these linkage rods, they break into these ball links. It doesn't take long. It's a very short period of time. These things will be much looser. But if these were disconnected, all these parts are moving very freely. They checked out. So I'm happy with the build so far. The drive shaft is spinning effortlessly. There's nothing hanging it up. All these parts and pieces are sliding seamlessly. There's a little resistance on these linkage rods, but that's just because they're new. I mean, it was the same thing on the 650, and now the 650 ones aren't like that anymore. They're pretty, they're perfect. And I think that's why they set them up. Well, yeah, they're a little tight at first, but they'll be perfect after a couple of flights. So that's the build so far. It's gone really well. I'll pick up in the next session with installing the servos, and we'll get it done from there.